The evening was calm, the sun fading into a soft golden hue as people rushed past the crowded streets of the city. Luxury cars lined the road, the sound of their engines blending with the chatter of vendors and footsteps of strangers. Among this rush, a black limousine slowed to a stop at a traffic light. Behind its tinted window sat a man whose life was wrapped in privilege and power, a millionaire known for his cold, composed demeanor. He rarely noticed the world outside his wealth. But that day, something caught his attention. At the corner of the street, near an old brick wall, a frail woman sat on the cold pavement with two little children clinging to her. Their clothes were torn, their faces smudged with dust, and their eyes, though tired, carried a silent story. She held a tin can in her trembling hands, hoping for a coin, a kind gesture, anything that could help her feed the little souls beside her. The man leaned forward, his heart unexpectedly pounding as his eyes locked on her face. It was faintly familiar, like a ghost from a forgotten chapter of his life. The longer he looked, the more his world seemed to blur around her. For the first time in years, the sound of traffic faded, the shine of wealth dimmed, and all that remained was her face, a face he had once memorized, once adored. His chest tightened as disbelief washed over him. Could it really be her? The woman he once held close, whose laughter used to light up his darkest nights. She was unrecognizable to the world, but not to him. Her hair was messy, her posture broken, yet her eyes, those same deep eyes, carried the quiet strength he had fallen in love with long ago. A storm of emotions rose inside him, guilt, shock, and something that felt painfully like longing. He had built walls around his heart, but in that moment, every brick began to crumble. The light turned green, the driver waited for his command, but he couldn't move. His world of gold and marble stood still before a woman on the street, and nothing felt the same anymore. This encounter was not just chance, it was destiny knocking again. Long before the cold pavement became her home, she had once lived a life painted in soft colors, warm laughter, sunlit gardens, and dreams that reached far beyond the horizon. She belonged to a family of comfort and elegance. Her parents adored her, and her heart carried a hope so pure that the world seemed kind. She was educated, graceful, and full of life's promise. Everything around her spoke of security and joy. But fate has a way of changing everything in a single heartbeat. It began with an accident, a sudden tragedy that took away her parents, leaving her alone with nothing but shattered dreams and an empty house. The wealth she thought would last forever slowly slipped away, piece by piece, as debts rose and trusted people turned their backs. Those who once praised her in glittering rooms no longer even looked her way. In the midst of her pain, she found comfort in love, the love of the man who had once promised to stand by her side. But when the darkness grew heavy, he chose to walk away, leaving her to face the storm alone. Her world collapsed silently, without screams, without witnesses, just the quiet breaking of a young woman's soul. Years passed, and life grew harsher. With no one to lean on, she fought to survive. She worked small jobs, endured cold nights, and carried the burden of two little lives when she became a mother. Their father had long disappeared, and she learned the meaning of sacrifice, giving her last piece of bread to her children, holding them tight through sleepless nights, praying that tomorrow would be kinder. But tomorrow was rarely kind. Poverty wrapped around her like a shadow she could not escape. Even then, she held on, not for herself, but for the two little faces that gave her a reason to breathe. She wasn't just a beggar, she was a woman who had lost everything yet refused to stop fighting for her children. Behind the dusty face and torn clothes stood a past built of broken dreams, betrayal, and unbearable loss. She wasn't invisible, she was a living story of strength buried under the ruins of what once was. As the millionaire sat frozen in his seat, his gaze locked on the woman and her two children, an invisible storm began to rise within him. Her face, once radiant with laughter and innocence, now carried the weight of pain and time. Every line on her cheeks, every tired blink of her eyes, felt like a chapter of a story he had left unfinished. His breath grew shallow as the memories, the ones he had carefully buried, began to surface with sharp, merciless clarity. He remembered the way she used to smile at him, not because of his wealth but because she saw the man beneath it. She had loved him when he was just a dreamer, before the riches, before the fame. And he had loved her too, deeply, foolishly, completely. But when life threw challenges at her, he had chosen the easy path. He had walked away, convincing himself that he wasn't strong enough to carry someone else's pain. Now, years later, that choice stood before him like a mirror reflecting his cowardice. She lowered her eyes as if ashamed to be seen by him. But it wasn't her shame he saw, it was his own. The sight of her shrinking away, clutching her children closer, burned through his chest like fire. Her silence screamed louder than words ever could. It was the silence of someone who had once trusted him, someone who no longer expected anything from the world. The city around him continued to move, horns blaring, people rushing, lights changing, but inside him, time had stopped. The sound of the wind outside the car felt louder, sharper, almost echoing the pounding of his heart. The wealth he had built, the name he had earned, the respect he commanded, none of it held any meaning as he watched her sitting on the cold street, wrapped in misery that once might have been avoided. Regret washed over him like a wave too powerful to resist. He felt the sting of tears he had long forgotten how to shed. She was no longer just a beggar to him, she was a living reminder of his greatest failure, the wound he thought would never resurface. And in that silent storm, something inside him began to crack open. The air inside the luxury car felt heavy, almost suffocating, as the millionaire's heart pounded with a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. His mind was torn between the man he had become and the man he once was. For years, he had built walls of pride, power, and distance around his soul. But in that fragile moment, watching the woman he had loved shiver with her children on the street, those walls began to crumble. Something deep within him, something long buried, stirred awake. The driver glanced back, waiting for instructions to move, but he didn't speak. His hand, resting on his chest, trembled slightly as his thoughts raced faster than the city lights around him. He could turn away. He could tell himself it wasn't his problem. He could let the world swallow her pain as it had done to countless others. But as he stared at her, a different voice spoke, a quiet, human voice that reminded him of promises never fulfilled. He slowly opened the car door and stepped out. The cool evening breeze brushed against his face, but what shook him more was the sight of her flinching as if expecting rejection or ridicule. People walking by stared curiously, whispering about why a man of such status had stopped for a beggar. But for him, the crowd didn't exist anymore. Without a single word, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his black card, the symbol of everything he had gained. But instead of simply offering money, he knelt down, something no one had ever seen him do before. His heart ached as he extended his hand, not as a rich man to the poor, but as a man to the woman who had once meant everything. In that moment, his decision was clear. He wasn't just going to give her money and walk away. He was going to give her and her children a home, safety, and dignity. He was going to rewrite the story he once abandoned. Whispers rose in the air, shocked faces surrounded them, but he didn't care. It was more than charity, it was redemption. His life, once defined by wealth, had found a new purpose in a single, life-changing decision. The decision he made on that cold evening became the spark that changed everything. The millionaire's world, once filled with glittering lights, grand parties, and empty victories, began to shift in ways he had never imagined. Bringing her and the children into his home wasn't just an act of kindness, it was a quiet promise to himself, a way of facing the guilt and pain he had carried for years. For the first time, his mansion, always silent and lifeless, echoed with the soft laughter of children. He arranged for warm clothes, a safe room, and proper medical care. But beyond material comfort, he gave them something they hadn't felt in a long time, dignity. The woman, once broken by the world, stood a little taller with each passing day. She still carried the weight of her past, but slowly, the fear in her eyes began to fade, replaced by a fragile but growing hope. He watched as her children played in the garden, their faces glowing with joy they had never known. It made him realize how wealth meant nothing without a heart to share it with. For him, this wasn't just about helping them survive, it was about healing his own soul. Every small act of care stitched a torn piece of his heart back together. He began to smile again, not the practiced smile of a man in power, but the quiet, genuine smile of a man rediscovering his humanity. The people who once judged him as cold and untouchable were stunned by the change they saw. His gesture echoed far beyond that single night, inspiring others around him. But most of all, it changed the way he saw himself. The emptiness he once felt in rooms full of luxury was now replaced with a warmth he couldn't buy with any fortune. The woman never expected miracles, but life had given her a second chance, and him too. The past could not be erased, but it no longer chained them. In its place stood a new beginning, fragile, real, and filled with quiet strength. The world saw a millionaire helping a beggar, but in truth, it was two broken souls finding their way back to life.